Building successful APIs. Now that we've got an idea of what different APIs are, and we've made some calls and seen some examples, let's talk about what makes an API successful. So, whether it's private or public, a successful API is one that developers want to use and want to share with others. The API needs to have a clear purpose and functionality. It can't have a bunch of mangled concerns that individuals can't really figure out how to interact or why they'd interact with it. It needs to be discoverable. One of the things that can make a great API fall short is if nobody can find out about it and discover it and how to use it in their context. It needs to be easy to use so developers can quickly become productive using it. If they look at your API and find that it's overly complex, they might rather invest the time in finding a workaround if it's a quicker route than using your API itself. More use means greater engagement, and the more contributors from developers who can add value to your service by providing you feedback and insight as to how you can improve your API. So our focus is to design for API success. And one of the key ways is to take an API design-first approach when looking at these APIs. The focus here is getting on the API design right before investing in building it. Building the implementation of an API is a time-consuming and expensive process, so it's especially time-consuming and expensive if you need to undo all of that because you didn't really think through and get in feedback on your design. So, how do we design an API that developers will want to use? Well, first thing we got to do is back up from the technical items and start figuring out what developers really want from your API. So what is going to make their lives easier and their ability to use your reusable components easier in the apps that they are potentially working on? We need to design the API for business use cases it will fulfill, not to model the backend services or applications directly, but thinking about more of the process. We focus on performance of client applications and the user experience. We then define it iteratively, getting feedback from developers on its usability and functionality along the way. If we take an approach where we just build it out and deliver it and don't actually get insight into people's thoughts on its usage, then it's possible that we won't build out a very effective API. So we need to model it cleanly and consistently and include developer tools to discover and play with the API, possibly before it's even fully implemented. So now let's take a look at what the API development lifecycle looks like. Well, the first part of the API development lifecycle is to sit down and design your API. We want to be able to then simulate that design without going through the full implementation process, gather feedback on that API that we've simulated, and then do some type of validation to make sure this is really what we need and want. Out of this comes an API spec written in RAML, something we'll discuss a bit later. And this will define effectively the design, the interface of our API. Once we've got that RAML interface, we can actually use it not just as a descriptor of the design, but also to create the build of the API itself. As we build that out, we can then add a testing layer into it where we can run tests both on the unit and integration level to ensure that the test and API is functioning as needed, along with the functional level when you get closer to having it built out. And this will provide us at the end a service with APIs. Now that we've got the service with APIs, it's time to start kind of our cycle. So first off, we'd version the API, saying this might be version 1.0. We may wish to secure the API inside of itself or with an external proxy. Deploy and register the API to a platform. And that platform we register it to, allowing us to monitor and get insights on the API's usage. Analyze those insights and data to get predictive items that we might need to determine based on our business, or just to get ideas of the usage of our API. Using these tools to troubleshoot when things go wrong, when items don't go through correctly or we seem to have some type of issue. And then, of course, to scale our API. Once it starts getting widespread adoption, how do we dynamically scale it such that it can handle those higher peak loads that come on with wider adoption? And then finally, respond to all these different items that we've taken in. Feedback, pieces we've had to fix, items we've analyzed, and continue on that cycle with the next version or iteration of the API, and continuing this cycle as we go through and make our API better and better for the consumers.